My name is Julian Davis, and this talk is entitled Well-Intentioned Self-Delusion About Collective Goals at Social Ontology 2021. This talk is going to be primarily concerned with answering the following question. What is the best philosophical explanation of how agents who profess a commitment to a collective goal can be mistaken about their own intentions? First, I want to note that while I am particularly interested here in collective goals and collective action problems, the subject matter regarding how agents may have mistaken beliefs about their intentions has a more general applicability. It so happens that in collective action problems, with respect to collective goals, certain aspects and tensions that arise with respect to agents embracing the means towards an avowed goal or end put in stark relief some of the questions about intentionality and about the relation between belief and intention that I wish to highlight. That'll become clear in a moment as I proceed, but I have in mind things like the opportunity cost involved with pursuing a course of action towards a collective goal as opposed to an alternative action that's perhaps more self-interested, or questions about the efficacy of one's part or role in a larger group action. So this is just to note that I'm focused on collective goals for that reason, but in fact, the subject matter may have more general applicability. Okay, I want to first focus in on this issue about mistaken beliefs about avowed intentions. People regularly avow commitment to personally act towards a collective goal, for instance, social justice causes, environmental protection, you name it. Such avowals are often accompanied by beliefs affirming the will to embrace the suitable means towards those goals, either proactively or when the appropriate opportunities arise. However, many collective action problems present contextual concerns in particular circumstances about, for instance, opportunity costs or questions about inefficacy, which provide, one might say, reasons or excuses for agents to forego action. An example might be liberal parents who believe that segregation is unjust and who perhaps reluctantly oppose neighborhood school redistricting in their community that would enhance diversity and integration because of a supposed threat to the quality of their child's education. That might be borne out in some considerations about whether redistricting in their community will have any impact on social integration in society at large, or just the opportunity cost of moving forward with a redistricting plan versus what they perceive to be, for some reason, a better course of action for their child's education because of a perceived threat to the quality of their education, something like this. This is just one example among many. We could think of many more. What I wish to highlight is that if this becomes a persisting pattern of conduct where available means arise but then are passed over based on these kinds of considerations, it'd be natural to think that such persons are either intellectually dishonest about their real commitments or hold mistaken beliefs about their avowed intentions. So just in the interest of focusing on this issue, which I want to focus on in this talk about mistaken beliefs about avowed intentions and about that possibility, let's give these hypothetical persons the benefit of the doubt and focus on the second horn here and assume this is not an issue about intellectual dishonesty, but rather an issue about potentially mistaken beliefs about avowed commitments and avowed goals. The question I'm really going to be asking is, how must we conceive of human intentional agency to make this intuition about mistaken beliefs about avowed intentions more intelligible? I'm going to discuss three approaches: cognitivism, inferentialism and planning theory. And then I'm going to conclude by opining about what I think the best combination of these perspectives is in terms of trying to answer the questions that I've been raising. I want to start with some preliminaries about the type of intentions that I'm focused on here. Focus really on future-directed personal intentions. So a distinctive kind of intending to do something in contradistinction to other forms of intentional agency, such as acting with an intention or acting intentionally. For instance, Anscombe's conception, her practical knowledge conception of acting with an intention isn't going to be sufficient to account for mistaken beliefs about future directed intentions in this context. For instance, this practical knowledge conception of an intention being the cause of what it understands, sort of that Anscombe borrows from Aquinas. It's also picked up by Velleman and others. Really does seem an opposite in this context, and can be seen to license a kind of wishful thinking. I mean, merely possessing an intention about social justice, for instance, is not going to amount to practical knowledge of bringing it about. So the kind of wishful thinking licensed by any purported non-observational, non-inferential, practical knowledge of intentions to realize a future collective goal, for instance, won't pass a sort of straight-faced test. So we'll need to look for alternatives. And one way in which this practical knowledge idea has been elaborated is with a sort of cognitivist strategy where instead of a practical knowledge state, we think about intentions more as cognitive belief-like commitments to the occurrence of the goal that they represent. This, again, this is a sort of cognitivist position about intentions and what kind of mental state they are, that they are a belief-like cognitive commitment to the occurrence of the goal they represent. And I want to highlight some problems for cognitivism that arise, in particular when we look a little bit more closely at norms of means and coherence and how they interact with issues about first-person authority, about one's own cognitive commitments. So it's rather uncontroversial that agents reason from intended ends to intended means, or specific steps towards accomplishing their goals. But if intentions are belief-like cognitive commitments to the occurrence of the goal they represent, they must also entail a belief-like cognitive commitment to some means or steps towards accomplishing that goal. We might say that agents with future directed intentions towards collective goals, then, who regularly abstain on the basis of countervailing considerations, like we've been considering, from taking the rational means to accomplish those goals, on a cognitivist picture, then, must be mistaken about their own beliefs. This notion about being mistaken or having mistaken beliefs about one's beliefs can be considered a kind of incoherence within one's beliefs, but suffice for our purposes, this kind of incoherence is borne out with respect to first-person authority, where first, I wish to just sort of highlight that it's prima facie inapposite to assume that agents don't possess first-person authority about the identity of their own cognitive commitments. So it's unlikely that one believes something about oneself that in fact one does not believe. Cynthia MacDonald has a pithy quip in this regard where she writes, "One thinks the thoughts one thinks one thinks." And that just seems like a very good presumption. I mean, perhaps rebuttable, but a pretty strong presumption. Well-intentioned agents then may believe that they will take the means to accomplish their goals. And while those first-order beliefs may be false, if they don't actually take the means, it's not that they hold false beliefs about what they believe. Rather, we might think they systematically fail to intend the means to their end when suitable opportunities arise, despite their mistaken belief that they will, where now intentions and beliefs are distinctive types of attitudes. So this kind of alternate approach in inferentialism can help to avoid some of the getting wrapped up in the kind of knot that we saw with respect to cognitivism here. Inferentialism theorizes that agents have practical knowledge of their present intentions from which they can infer that they will later act in accordance with those intentions. See, for instance, Sarah Paul's work on this. A present intention then is not a belief-like cognitive commitment, but rather a practical commitment to undertake a course of action. From practical knowledge of one's practical commitments, one can defeasibly infer that one will undertake the appropriate course of action. And this is much more germane to explaining how an agent may hold a mistaken belief about their own intentions. Practical knowledge of one's own mind, which regularly sanctions inferences about actions one will undertake, however, and this is the salient point, does not guarantee that such inferences will be valid. So inferentialism helps to take a step beyond cognitivism in understanding the type of mental state that an intention is in such a way that we start to understand how one might be mistaken or have mistaken beliefs about it. One can fill in a little bit what it is that an agent is mistaken about and being mistaken about their own intention by taking a look at the planning theory, according to which an intention is a distinctive kind of temporally extended practical attitude that functions to guide action, that is subject to rational norms of consistency and coherence. Intentions on the planning theory fulfill an action-guiding functional role in human psychology. They're embedded in a sort of web of regularities and norms that structure practical deliberation and action in distinctive ways that differ from other common sense psychological states, such as beliefs and desires. Perhaps such other common sense psychological states to which we ascribe more first-person access and authority. And the implication then is that if functional roles, regularities, and norms distinctive of what it is to have a commitment or an intention to do something are missing from an agent's conduct with respect to a potential outcome, we might conclude that the agent does not possess the corresponding intention to bring it about. So by identifying intentions with the functional and causal roles they play in guiding action, an agent's privileged first-person perspective is not the only reliable source of authority about them. What this points to is a kind of rationality of commitment, a kind of distinctive sort of rationality, which describes a future-directed intention as a distinctive kind of complex, diachronic mental state, the absence of which is observable in human conduct. And this makes it entirely intelligible how an agent may presently hold a mistaken belief about their avowed intentions. Planning theory, in other words, gives some substance to the idea that agents' inferences about their future actions are defeasible. Agents who avow commitment to a collective goal and yet systematically fail to intend the means to achieve it when suitable opportunities arise simply do not evince the commitment nor possess the intention that they think they have. So, in conclusion, we've looked at a few different approaches from sort of Anscomian practical knowledge approach, which didn't look sufficient to account for the answers to the questions raised at the beginning of this talk. We looked at a cognitivist interpretation of means-end coherence, which makes first-person authority about certain cognitive commitments seem inscrutable. An inferentialist approach actually helps to clarify the kind of inferences about future action that are often sanctioned by practical knowledge of the contents of one's own mind. And by clarifying the rationality of commitment, as it were, the planning theory explains the defeasibility of such inferences and makes intelligible how it is that otherwise well-intentioned people can sometimes lack the intentions that they thought they had. Very grateful for having the opportunity to present at Social Ontology again in 2021, and I look forward to the Q&A.